I would like to welcome wholeheartedly Mrs. Katerina Przyczepa, is the Ukrainian journalist. She's based in Kyiv, and I think Katerina, you'll be speaking English or Polish, any language you like. That's a true spirit of a modern Ukrainian society, that they are more European than we are sometimes. So I'm very grateful you sacrificed your time to take part in our event. Monsieur Mathieu, friend of Baudier, the friend of myself, the member of the ID Scientific Committee. If you look through your files, you will find Mathieu's article, which was delivered to this conference, and we promise you to distribute the Polish version soon, in a couple of days, because it arrived very late and I wasn't able to make a proper translation to Polish. Thank you, Mathieu, for coming, and I know that your trip was very long. Mathieu is based in Berlin and is a well-known specialist of European affairs. And last but not least, Mr. Jeremi Sadowski from the Instytut of im.Tadeusza Mazowieckiego, who is a specialist on German politics and will elaborate a little bit on a German view on Polish and extra Polish policies concerning the Eastern Europe. We will start. I wouldn't make a longer introduction to the subject because we are a little bit running out of time. So I think we will start with Mathieu's presentation, which will be a very good beginning of the further discussion. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's working. Hello. Yes, as Andreas said, so I'm French, but I live in Germany, and before that I used to live in Austria, and also before that in Lebanon. So it has been a while that I have left France, but I will try to bring also some French perspective. And I'm actually a software engineer and also a political scientist. So what I'm trying to bring to the Institute of European Democracy is more an interdisciplinary perspective, as you will see in my essay. And I just wanted to throw a few ideas more specifically about this question of core and periphery, whereas the essay is broader. And I will keep it short, Andrei, so that we can talk more. So I want to talk about peripheries and center first from a European political perspective. Then to talk about core and peripheries within countries, and that's why I brought this map. So it will be rather in the second part of my talk, and then finally from a geopolitical perspective, that is taking Europe as a whole and what we usually call the peripheral countries. So first, from the political and institutional perspective, actually, when we talk about a core Europe, there are various cores that we are talking about, and they more or less overlap. And I think it's important that we try to bring some clarity to this. First, there are the founding members, the 6 countries, France, Germany, Italy, and the Benelux countries. And it comes up regularly more from a bit mythical perspective that, okay, they founded the European community more than half a century ago. Then there is the actual industrial heartland of Europe that we can see here, which are the richest part of Europe in green in the center, which is basically the part of Europe which industrialized first, and which at some point, as you know, went, of course, also in Bohemia, Silesia, and which is like the industrial heartland. And sometimes when we talk about core Europe, that's actually what we are thinking about, of course, including North Italy, which is an extremely developed part of Europe. Then, and we talk a lot about it during the last few days. There is a French-German engine, the moteur franco-allemand, which has brought a lot of impulse to European construction. And as I argue in my essay a bit provocatively, and I mean maybe I was proven wrong this week, which I think has kind of become maybe an hindrance sometime, that actually it's a bit outdated since the enlargement and since the reunification of Germany. And finally, the Eurozone, that is the countries which have joined the Euro. And now, as was mentioned in the previous panel, we are reaching a phase where, and that's clearly the program of Emmanuel Macron, that he described and he got elected on this program, that we will probably go to a two-speed or multi-speed Europe, where the core will be the Eurozone. And then there are various peripheries. There are the new members, often considered, new members. It was like 14 years ago that they joined, so Poland among them. But they are still considered new members, so kind of, okay, they still need to learn or to join. So is it still relevant? There are the stagnating members of the Euros, which are usually described as Southern Europe. And as we see, these kind of peripheries do not overlap, because Poland typically was one of the most dynamic countries from an economical perspective, the only country which did not go through a recession. And finally, there are those which are less integrated. That is, which were always more reluctant to integrate the system and to go closer. And that used to be the UK, and that's why many have rejoiced that UK would leave with the Brexit, and to a certain extent Poland, mostly because, not because it is not pro-European in the population, I mean, I'm not talking about the current government, but typically because Poland never really wanted to join the Euro. So my point here is to say that these various core and peripheries are used interchangeably, and maybe not necessarily very productively all the time in the discourse, and we should be careful. And then an argument that I develop in the essay is that I see a risk, and I'm a bit worried, that we build Europe around the euro, around the currency, because it puts too much weight on the economy, and we have seen that this integration could have a negative effect. So now, if we look at this map, and we can see clearly this industrial heartland in green. But what is more interesting to see is the evolution between 2004 and 2014 at the regional level. And what we can see, and it's especially striking with Poland, with these big green areas which appears around Warsaw, basically, Warsaw. And actually for me, I had not been in Warsaw for 15 years, so it was the first time in 15 years, and I was very impressed to see how the capital has developed, how Warsaw has developed. And as you can see also, the Eastern Germany kind of progressed overall. But if you take France or the UK, you can see that the wealth became more concentrated in the center. So my point here is that actually we may have some core periphery problems at the EU level, but we also have some core periphery issues within the member states. And the question I'm asking is whether that kind of unbalance, inequalities within the countries, are not one of the biggest driver of populism and the fact that some regions feel left out from this development. So I think our Polish friends here could describe more, but my understanding, you can correct me, is that the basis of the current government is much more on the countryside than typically in the richer regions. And as I was discussing with you just a few minutes ago, I live in Berlin, but I spend quite a lot of time near Frankfurt Oder, which is a border town between Germany and Poland. And as you know, it used to be a city which was in the German Empire, and which then got cut by the border on the Oder, and the one part of town became a Polish town, which is called Subice, if I Subice, and I can observe over the years that they are making a lot of effort to integrate these two parts of the cities, and the region around the city is called region ohne Grenze, bis Granice. And recently they have made huge work to connect actually the water system and the energy system, the electricity grid of the two parts, the Polish part and the German part. And my point here is that this was made possible because of the EU, because of the Europe we have built, also because of Schengen, because I remember the time long ago, and I think it was in 2003, when I got blocked because I did not have my pass on the Oder, and now we can go back and forth. And what is interesting is that Frankfurt, and to a certain extent Subice and the region behind it, are peripheral in their own countries. That is, when you are in this region of Germany, when you come from Berlin, and especially when you come from West Germany, it's really another world. And this part of East Germany has voted massively for AfD, or even for worse, the NPD, which are pure neo-Nazi. And I think that example, like Frankfurt-Subice, which is very striking because it's really on the border and shows that the integration of the EU could help to fight the core periphery issues within the member state, which I think is as big or maybe bigger an issue than the core periphery issue within the EU. So I come to my last point, which is more the geopolitics, because it's more my specialty, and also because I think that it may be, and we have discussed it at length when talking about Russia before, this may be the geopolitical tensions and issues and challenges, maybe what will force Europe to unite through a common defense, through, I hope not war, but we already have war in Europe, in Ukraine, and there is a realization that, especially now that the US, in a long-term process, which is now obvious with Donald Trump, is withdrawing from Europe and withdrawing its security guarantees, Europe at the same time needs to be able to defend itself, but also to realize that it has no choice but to be connected with its neighborhood. And that's something I develop at length in the essay, that's a definition of Europe, that it is connected. It is connected with the south of the Mediterranean and through the Mediterranean with Africa. It is connected with Western Asia through the Levant, and typically Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean is important. And it is connected to Central Asia via Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. And I really loved when it was pointed out before that actually that's a better map of Europe too. And we miss also North Africa, you know, because you cannot see Europe as an island. And now I think you can imagine where is my point going. This is these peripheral countries, like Poland, like Italy, like Greece, like Spain, actually, they are not periphery, they are an interface. They are an interface to this rest of the world. And of course, in the globalization, you know, we used to believe, I think many of us, that in the 90s, early 2000s, that globalization would bring a lot of progress. It did bring a lot of progress to some part of the world, but that everything would be perfect and we will have one world village. I think we need to ask ourselves hard question, why so many of our fellow citizens feel left out of this development. But still, there is potential with the rest of the world because the current phase won't last forever. And even if we need to somehow defend ourselves against an aggressive Russia or against migrations, which are also consequences from climate change, which are consequences from bad governance and lack of democracy in the EU neighborhood. And when I say defend, it doesn't mean build a wall and let people die in the sea, of course not. But to be able to manage it, we need to understand it. And as was pointed out before about Poland understanding, obviously, the challenges in Ukraine and with Russia better, of course, Greece, Italy will understand better the challenges of the Mediterranean. And I have been quite critical on the policy of France to try to deal with the Libyan problem without involving Italy, which for good or bad reasons has a long, long history of knowing what's going on in Libya. This is just an example. We could also say that the UK, obviously, is also an interface with another kind of neighborhood, which are the United States, which more and more we have to consider as something external, not necessarily negatively. And so I think you got my point. So not periphery, but interfaces with the world. So in conclusion, when preparing for this talk, I have read a very interesting paper which was written by a researcher from the Poznan University, so Polish researchers, and which is available, if some are interested, I can send it, which is freely available in English, that was an analysis on Poland, on how the structural fund, the EU structural fund, were dispatched throughout the Polish regions. And a very rigorous and scientific analysis focusing on this core periphery problematics, but now at the level of each Polish voivodin, and between like the center, which is often the capital of the region, and the villages and so on. And the researcher pointed out that there are two kinds of policies, and I want to conclude on this just to open the discussion of also what can we do actively and what kind of policies can we have. And there are two kinds of policies to deal with this problematic of core and periphery. One is a policy of equalization, which is trying to reduce differences. And another one is a policy which is more of polarization, where you will put more resources in the center because usually it's money better spent. It will be more efficient to maybe to develop Warsaw as a bustling city I've been observing since I arrived yesterday, and with great pleasure. And it may be more efficient than to improve infrastructure in the Carpathian or wherever. And what they observed at the Polish level is that actually the poor regions in the east tended to focus more on equalization, and the richer regions more on polarization. So my point, and their point as well, is that one has to be realistic. That is that there will be differences within Europe, and I mean also former communist Europe will take a lot of time to recover from the disaster that it was, from a social, economical and also moral point of view, which should not be understated. But also to see that there is potential in these peripheries. That was it.
Thank you very much for contributing a lot to this conference and very interesting presentation in your paper. When I was thinking over the subject that was proposed to you between Vyšehrad and Weimar, my idea was to confront two models of mostly Polish foreign policies. One which was projected from the very beginning of our presence in Europe and was based on a context with a biggest powers of European Union, France and Germany, while Germany is our biggest and the richest neighbor, and France was traditionally linked to Poland in the past. And the Vyšehrad understood not only as a forum of regional cooperation as it was projected in 1990s, but in the sense that was given to the Vyšehrad group by current Polish government, which was dreaming about building a separate coalition of nations in the Central Europe, including Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, against the what they call German superpower, which was absolutely a failure because Czech Republic and Slovakia are not interested in a building separate alliance, and Hungary is using their links to Poland in a very tactical way, not paying any tribute to it on a European forum, which was the best example, was in Prime Minister Orban's expose, where he was giving his first speech after being elected now in 2018, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he didn't even mention Poland in his expose in the fragment concerning foreign policy. And this brings me to the conclusion that what is the biggest loss for us here, as a country which is, as we can say, partially the hardcore of Europe and partially the periphery of Europe, having common border with Ukraine and Russia, and very big links to the countries that are not the part of the European Union, that we lost our role, our traditional role, of representing and advocating our eastern neighbors' interests in Europe. This is how Poland moved from being a hardcore of Europe to the peripheries, because it ceased to play the role which was natural for my country. Having Katerina here, who herself is Ukrainian and can tell us about Ukrainian perspective of how changed the attitude of European Union towards Ukraine, which is one of the biggest neighbors not only of Poland but also of European Union, and the role of European countries of promoting Ukrainian current and future presence in Europe.
So I basically probably will start from the key point in terms of European politics, meaning European neighborhood policy as such. And to my mind, at the very beginning, this very idea was the idea of how do we arrange peripheries. And basically, Ukraine has been labeled as EU periphery officially from 2003, but probably was perceived like that before as well. And then I think in many ways this was something which shaped relations between EU and Ukraine, even provided that Ukrainian elites haven't been decisive themselves on whether they actually want to have closer ties with the EU, and wouldn't be too costly to them personally to have such relations. But then within Eastern Partnership, but basically those sporadic periods in recent Ukrainian history when Ukrainian elites decided they in fact wanted integration with the EU and even tried to declare that, each time it was not welcomed in the EU itself. And the Eastern Partnership program or initiative, whatever you will tell it, basically was something which once more has underlined the status of Eastern European countries at the very official periphery of Europe, meaning that the very 6 countries which were put in this program, they declared different goals at the very beginning. We started with Ukraine, which at that point in time, at least declared that Ukraine would very much like to become a member of the EU at some point in time, and ending with Azerbaijan, which didn't want to any specific integration and wasn't even interested in negotiating anything like association agreement, and had this idea of having status of strategic partners of the EU, basically based on their position as a very important transit point for energy resources and so on. And I remember talking to the ambassador of Ukraine to the EU in 2008, when this Eastern Partnership initiative was first officially proposed, and he was speaking. Probably he was also playing for the Ukrainian public. He was presenting his not outrage, but dissatisfaction with the program, saying basically the very same words, that you put countries in one group which officially declare different things, and which some of them don't want to cooperate among themselves too closely for different reasons. Some of them are geographical, some of them are political preferences, and so on. And then basically you underline that we don't want you, and we don't want anything specific about from you, apart from maybe being a safe territory to transit energy resources by. And now, if we speak about Polish-Ukrainian relations. Speaking about Eastern Partnership itself, probably at that point in time, given the situation and ideas within the EU, the Eastern Partnership was the best which Polish diplomacy could have achieved in terms of bringing Ukraine closer to the EU, and maybe Belarus as well. So it's hard for me to say something very specific about Polish relations with Belarus. But from the point of view of Ukraine, it wasn't it wasn't what Ukrainian elites and society at that point have aspired to. And it's very also one of the important things in terms of geopolitics and security, as whereas NATO has been always, or not now, but for a very long time, has been very controversial, the idea of any close relations between Ukraine and NATO. EU has been always has had always a positive image in Ukraine, and most of the citizens of Ukraine wanted to have closer ties with the EU. So, although for most of the big enlargement countries, NATO and EU memberships were closely linked, and probably that's why it was presented in Ukraine as well. So you really have to become a member of NATO if you want to have any ties with the EU, but maybe different model could have been developed for such countries as Ukraine. Well, coming back to Eastern Partnership, and Polish-Ukrainian relations, and presenting the Eastern Europe to the rest, or to the core of the EU, if you wish. So basically, it's very hard to say in what point in time in Polish foreign policies which views or images of Ukraine have prevailed, because even at times when the role of Poland and Polish elites, for instance, as 2004, has been very crucial to resolving crisis in Ukraine, and having sorted the bridge or interface between EU and Ukraine. The status of buffer has been openly discussed in policy papers, in media articles here in Poland, and this romantic vision of Kresy, which is very key to understanding of Polish attitudes towards Ukraine, also says of Ukraine as something being farther to the center, and something which is Kresy is something which has a romantic description here in Poland, but also it's something very calm and beautiful, and whatever nice you might think of it, but it's something close of the excitement of the capital, of the city, of the center. It's something where you go to have relaxed, nice time. So, having said all that, Ukrainian society and elites have never been very persistent or consecutive in presenting their wish to enter the core. But the very idea, when you label some territories at the very beginning not being in the center, and means that you develop your policies and relations with those territories or countries in a specific manner, which basically conserves their status. Well, I could add some other arguments to that, speaking about all this nuclear disarmament of Ukraine, which basically was, at the one hand, it was one of the factors which probably have raised the level of security in the region, but on the other hand, it gave Russia a status of the somewhat supervisory country of the region, because all the nuclear armament which was removed from Ukraine was moved to Russia. So basically, the international partners of Ukraine have basically played for some time on the fact that Ukraine was double labeled as a periphery. From the point of view of EU and from the point of view of Russia, which well has continued policy of this way, and I guess I would have to propose some ideas how this situation could be changed, because I guess it's it's time to do that, and also because what I was trying to say all the time, that it's not very productive in some ways to label something and then coordinate your policies with how you labeled some countries' origins. And maybe it's better to reevaluate policies from time to time, just to be on the same page with the countries you try to develop relations with. And at present, it has to be said that there are a lot of initiatives, both of the EU and EU member states, being implemented in Ukraine. In maybe this, though most of them are as technical assistance, humanitarian assistance, and projects related with the situation of war and number of refugees, internally displaced people in the country. Maybe via this set circumstances, the ties between the Ukraine and specific EU member states will be well developed. Maybe it would be better if they were developed under different circumstances, but maybe this is a start, and we have to find some positive or optimism in every situation that we have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And moving more west, I will give the floor to Jeremi Sadowski, who will speak a bit from a German perspective.
Więc może, bo tutaj na początku konferencji została przedstawiona taka szeroka perspektywa europejska, więc nie sposób się będzie odnieść do większości tych wątków, które we wstępie się pojawiły, ale może parę słów na temat tego, bo mieszkam w Niemczech od wielu lat, od 1972 roku, więc jakoś tak przyglądam się tej polityce od dłuższego czasu, więc może parę słów o tym, jak sprawy wschodnie, no zwłaszcza sprawa Ukrainy i Rosji, wygląda z niemieckiej perspektywy. I jest to jakiś przyczynek tego tematu centrum i peryferie, czy tak jak Kazik wspominał, wzory kulturowe mają wyjątkową odporność na czas i zmiany i często trwają bardzo długo i wydaje się, że już pewne schematy zostają przezwyciężone, potem wracają. Czy też jest też tak, że zmiany są możliwe i są bardzo szybkie w niektórych okolicznościach. Czy dlatego, że gospodarka to sprawia? Popatrzmy na przykład Irlandii, która przez wiele lat uchodziła za przykład kraju kompletnie peryferyjnego i nie nadającego się na dobrą sprawę do solidnej współpracy. Teraz już ta etykietka zniknęła. Wielu Brytyjczyków jeździło w swoim czasie do Irlandii, żeby tam zarabiać. Był przykład Finlandii, która zawsze uchodziła za kraj zdecydowanie podrzędny w stosunku do zarówno Szwecji, jak i Norwegii. Teraz już w tej sytuacji się nie znajduje, więc możemy też przytoczyć szereg przykładów awansu jakiegoś kraju, zwłaszcza w obrębie Unii Europejskiej. Więc, że tak powiem, można na tę perspektywę patrzeć pesymistycznie z punktu widzenia mocno utrwalonych wzorców kulturowych. Można na to patrzeć nieco bardziej optymistycznie, że często gospodarka pozwala wykonywać duże skoki, a często geopolityka. Dla mnie ciekawą sytuacją jest, jak sytuacja zmieniona geopolityczna Ukrainy, która w tej chwili jest w imię wartości europejskich lepiej czy gorzej, ale jednak broniona przez państwa zachodnie, czy to na dłuższą metę wpłynie też na wzory kulturowe w Niemczech. Mówiąc szczerze, na razie tego wpływu nie widzę, ale bardzo będzie to interesujące, czy ta zmiana nastąpi. Parę tutaj uwag na ten temat. Mianowicie w momencie, kiedy wybucha ta rewolucja na Majdanie, w Niemczech zostało to przyjęte pozytywnie, z pewną znacznie większą powściągliwością niż w Polsce, ale jednak pozytywnie, no, jako zrozumiały odruch moralny, ale też jako opowiedzenie się Ukrainy po stronie wartości demokratycznych i europejskich. Później jednak zaczęły się pojawiać głosy, że jednak, żeby rozwiązać sprawę Ukrainy, potrzebne jest włączenie do tego Rosji i że rozwiązanie problemu ukraińskiego łączy się jednak z udziałem Rosji. Bez tego nie da się tych spraw jakoś porządnie uporządkować. I właściwie tutaj mieliśmy do czynienia dość szybko, po pewnym okresie dużego zainteresowania, pozytywnych reakcji, dość szybko mieliśmy powrót do schematu kulturowego Rosja pierwsza, a kraje wschodnie z nią związane są na drugim czy też trzecim miejscu. I obserwując to, co można zaobserwować w niemieckich mediach, czytając niemieckie gazety, ten schemat w jakiejś mierze obowiązuje. To znaczy stosunkowo mało jest artykułów na temat Ukrainy, sytuacji na Ukrainie. W dyskusjach na temat Ukrainy bardzo często pojawiają się znawcy od Rosji, ale nie od Ukrainy. I jeśli chodzi, tutaj wspomniał o tym Kazik Wójcicki, jeśli chodzi o ukrainistykę na uniwersytetach niemieckich, nie jest tragicznie, bo szereg uniwersytetów jednak ma ukrainistykę, Göttinga, Oldenburg, Regensburg, ale duże uniwersytety, o ile wiem, nie, to znaczy Berlin czy Hamburg nie, jest w Monachium prywatny uniwersytet ukraiński, ale jak gdyby ciągle jest ta sprawa i przekładów z ukraińskiego, dostępności jakichś współczesnych historii Ukrainy, o których też Kazik wspominał, że nie ma tych opracowań. Tu jest po prostu, nadal dominuje ten schemat jednak Rosja pierwsza, Ukraina druga. W związku z tym właściwie powinno się pojawić coś takiego jak zmęczenie Ukrainą i stopniowe odchodzenie od wsparcia dla Ukrainy dyplomatycznego, gospodarczego, kulturowego. Tymczasem ku mojemu, że tak powiem, miłemu zdziwieniu tak się nie dzieje. To znaczy małe poparcie na tej płaszczyźnie kulturowej. Jeśli chodzi o niemieckich historyków, to w moim przekonaniu jedynie Karl Schlegel się zajmuje i pokazuje historię Ukrainy z europejskiej perspektywy, ale nie jest to historyk mainstreamowy. Bardzo interesujący, on jest czytany, uważany za oryginała, ale nie jest w stanie narzucić swojego spojrzenia. Więc, jak mówię, mamy do czynienia z taką sytuacją, która nadal Niemcy popierają Ukrainę w pewnym zakresie. Można oczywiście powiedzieć, że wymiana handlowa i gospodarcza mogłaby być na znacznie wyższym poziomie. Jak się ocenia, ta wymiana jest mniej więcej na poziomie Bułgarii, więc to jest jak na potencjał ukraiński i demograficzny i gospodarczy, to jest stanowczo za mało. Mogłoby być znacznie większe wsparcie właśnie takie kulturowe w mediach, ale mimo to sytuacja popierania Ukrainy z przyczyn geopolitycznych nadal się utrzymuje. Tu może dwa słowa, o ile w Polsce poparcie dla Ukrainy w tym paradygmacie Giedroycia było przedstawiane jako takie dobro geopolityczne, bo nie ma wolnej Polski bez wolnej Ukrainy. Polska polityka na Zachodzie będzie się liczyła tylko wtedy, kiedy będzie się liczyła na Wschodzie. W końcu Rosja bez Ukrainy nie może być imperium, z Ukrainą może być. To są wszystko bardzo silne wypowiedzi pokazujące, że współpraca z Ukrainą dla Polski to przynosi jakieś duże dobro geopolityczne. To jest nasz wkład. To jest nie tylko jak gdyby partykularna współpraca na obrzeżach Europy, ale to jest coś, co wnosi coś do polityki całej Europy, a być może i polityki globalnej, no bo jeżeli Rosja bez Ukrainy nie jest tą potęgą. Wydaje mi się, że w przypadku ani Niemiec, ani Francji, ani większości innych państw zachodnich tego rodzaju paradygmatu nie było i nie ma po dziś dzień. To znaczy współpraca z Ukrainą okazuje się potrzebna i niezbędna. No, są argumenty moralne, jest sprawa prawa międzynarodowego, no i jest ta kwestia, że gdyby tutaj pozwolić Putinowi na dalszą agresję, no to sytuacja państw natowskich, państw bałtyckich, Polski zrobiłaby się dużo bardziej dramatyczna i być może Europa byłaby albo zmuszona do ustępstw, albo musiałaby się znacznie bardziej zaangażować w przypadku tych krajów. Więc ja mam wrażenie, że poza argumentami moralnymi i kwestią prawa międzynarodowego, teorią domina, jeżeli można zmieniać granice, to można zmieniać gdzie indziej granice. No to jest troszkę też teoria mniejszego zła. Popierajmy Ukrainę, bo inaczej dla nas wszystkich w ramach Unii Europejskiej i NATO będzie gorzej. Tej mocnej argumentacji polskiej, która kiedyś w polskiej polityce obowiązywała, że to jest takie dobro geopolityczne związane się, tego na Zachodzie nie było, ale jest nadal poparcie. W związku z tym, jak mówię, dla mnie jest ciekawe pytanie, kiedy i czy w tym dyskursie niemieckim ono się przerodzi no, w takie podejście do Ukrainy bez stereotypów i powiąże się też z jakąś wiedzą, bo w rozmowach prywatnych stwierdzam, że jest niewiedza niemiecka na temat Polski, jest niewiedza na temat Rosji i jest, że tak powiem, bezgraniczna niewiedza na temat Ukrainy. Więc to byłby też jeden z elementów przełamywania pewnej pustki takiej w myśleniu. Na razie tyle.
Dziękuję bardzo. Jeżeli mogę kilka uwag tutaj zgłosić, jeszcze oczywiście Ukraina nie jest tutaj wyłącznym i jedynym przedmiotem polityki wschodniej i polityki, w której mogła być reprezentowana przez sąsiadów dawnych republik sowieckich, ale też zwracam uwagę na to, że porównywanie sytuacji państw, które są członkami Unii Europejskiej i są członkami NATO, z sytuacją kraju, który został zaatakowany, ale nie należy do żadnej z tych organizacji czy sojuszy, no jest chyba trochę bezpodstawne, dlatego że nie sądzę, aby tego typu ryzyko jakakolwiek dyktatura panująca w Rosji mogła podjąć. Stąd w pierwszej części tej konferencji rozmawialiśmy o działaniach, które mają charakter agresywny, ale które nie mają charakteru zbrojnego przeciwko naszym państwom. I moim zdaniem do tego dojdzie. Więcej, ja stawiam tezę, że straszenie konfliktem zbrojnym z Rosją Putina w krajach Unii Europejskiej, w tym zwłaszcza w Polsce, ma charakter bardzo korzystny dla samej Rosji, dlatego że stawia wszystkich nas, którzy jesteśmy krytyczni wobec reżimu Putina, w sytuacji po prostu podżegaczy wojennych. Tak to niektórzy wprost nazywają, nie zdając sobie jakby sprawy z nierealności przekształcenia się tego konfliktu w konflikt zbrojny. Ale są też inne fragmenty Europy, które są blisko naszych granic Unii Europejskiej, których status, których aktualna sytuacja budzą niepokój co do przyszłości i stabilności granic. Mam na myśli na przykład Naddniestrze, część niepodległej Mołdawii, które de facto jest jedną z rosyjskich republik tak naprawdę. Oczywiście ma pewne cechy państwa niezależnego, aczkolwiek nieuznawanego przez nikogo. Ma też, cały czas zachowuje dość spore związki z resztą Mołdawii, będąc formalnie jego terytorium, ale nie należy tutaj zapominać, że tego typu quasi-państwowe byty były przez Rosję już tworzone, tak jak Abchazja, Osetia Północna, nieuznawane przez nikogo, cieszące się marionetkowymi rządami, jednocześnie będące elementem destabilizacji w regionie. Jeszcze wracając do spraw peryferiów, to chciałbym też właśnie, żeby Mathieu na ten temat trochę powiedział. I would like you, Mathieu, to elaborate a while on the situation we are facing now, while the part of European governments is very strictly opposing the main core of ideas that European Union was built on. The recent voting in the Hungarian parliament, where they changed the constitution, penalizing the help for foreign refugees, is something which, in my mind, devastates the hardcore of the values we built Europe on, which one of them was the solidarity among human beings. Do we have, in your opinion, any sort of means that will prevent Europe from jeopardizing its core values?
It's a question. Sorry. Let me answer. Maybe I will take the path of the refugees themselves, because as I said, I used to live in Lebanon, and back then, so 10 years ago, and I spent a lot of time in Syria. So you will see, I will try to answer your question, but you know, it takes some time, a long way. And so I have spent back then a lot of time in Syria. And my friend in Lebanon were saying, okay, Lebanon is so beautiful, it's so great, why do you spend all your time in Syria? But I had this relationship with the Syrian people, with the Syrian space, but I won't dwell on it. When the war started, and since I also had experienced a war in Lebanon, unfortunately, but against Israel, I started to follow it more closely than most Europeans. And of course, and I'm starting to answer your question, I followed it more closely than Hungarians, for example, than the Hungarian population. Nobody cared, but also in France, nobody cared about the repression by the Assad regime and so on and so on. But the people like me who knew the region were following. And then suddenly, people started to care when Daesh, so this fascist, so Islamist fascist, started to make horrendous crimes with the purpose of scaring Europe. Whereas Bashar al-Assad was doing horrendous crimes, but not with, was not advertising them. He was helped by Russian disinformation. We talked at length about before, in order to hide them and to present himself as a protector of Christians or whatever, So when Daesh used, and you remember, sorry to remind you that, but you know, when they killed these few journalists with Orange Street and so on, it had a huge effect on the whole of Europe. And it built on an old fear in Europe, because Europe historically has built itself culturally also against Islam. So I mean, it's not obvious to not to be afraid. Sorry for the translators. Not to be afraid by this extremely violent Islam, which has, of course, nothing to do with the Islam of the normal people. So now I'm going to my point. And when I'm trying to consider Hungary, and my wife is Hungarian, so we are quite close, and she's from Jewish origin. So you can imagine that these problems are really, we can feel them as well. And of course, I'm more connected to these problems than most of the people in Europe are connected to the problem in Hungary. And in order to understand such issue, I'm trying to come back to the core values that you describe. And I'm trying to understand and to think, okay, what do these Hungarian people who are voting for Orban, who are supporting him massively, I try to show them respect and understanding. It doesn't mean I accept what they are doing, what this government is doing. And what I see is that, just like in Serbia, in Hungary, you have this very strong psychology with Islam and with conquering Islam, because it has been occupied by the Ottoman Empire, which was not the case, for example, in Poland. It's always stopped in Vienna. And now, of course, there is something ridiculous with these countries, and we know the manipulation. I won't come back to all the disinformation we talked enough about. But we know it's completely ridiculous to have countries which are scared by just taking a few hundreds of people, and it will not change anything, of course. But then I'm trying to put myself at the place of this Hungarian population, which have seen the flow which was going from the Balkans in 2015 to Germany, and they saw this stream, and it was quite easy to sell them that this is another Muslim invasion. And so now I think that, and again, it's not like out of the box and so on, we will have solved the problem today, but as I said, I'm always trying, and I try to do that also in the essay about populism, to take a step back. And because I'm strong with my values and the values of the European Democratic Party and of the Institute of European Democrats, we know our values, we know our purpose. So I'm not afraid to think what these people are thinking. And I think the first step will be to show them respect. Because if we dismiss all these people as idiots, uneducated, or they don't know about, and so on, without considering that they may have different experiences than us, or that they don't have some experience like I have with the Syrians. So I think the first step will be to talk to them. Like, just to conclude, my wife, so Hungarian but growing up in Germany, half German and so on, she wanted to organize art summer camp for people of the AFD. Just doing art. And just to show them respect, to listen to them, to break this mood where they are. So basically, yeah, we need to be even stronger and keep believing in this value and go talk to these people. I think that's the first step somehow. Just.
That's what what I have in my mind mostly is that we have two kinds of jeopardy for European unity. One is inside Europe, the other is outside Europe. And some of them are mixed. If you are speaking about Hungary, look what happened with European citizenship. Viktor Orban delivered the Hungarian passports to thousands and thousands of people living in Ukraine, living in Romania, living in other countries that claim themselves to be Hungarian minorities. Then, of course, he did it not only because of his will to pump the nationalistic moods in Hungary up, but also to make them eligible to vote in Hungarian elections, which provided him additional 10 or 15% of votes, letting him to obtain absolute majority in Hungarian parliament, or the constitutional majority in Hungarian parliament. In the same time, Hungarian passports that were delivered to people living in Ukraine and the other post-Soviet territories became to be a subject of trade, of illegal trade. To this extent that United States Department declared that they will not accept anymore these new sorts of Hungarian passports to be stamped with United States visas because they are simply used as a tool to enter the territory of the United States for the people who not necessarily are wanted there. This is the European citizenship, right, which was delivered by Orban to these people. This was absolutely outside of any control from the European Union itself. We couldn't say anything about this, while it is still a vital part of our identity. And this was abused only for interest of one party in Europe, of the party that does not pay much attention to European values. This is what I think that makes a major risk to our future, to the future of the European Union, and shows that the level of integration we have now is very, very shallow and should be deepened in future.
Actually, I will start with those passport issue, but I also wanted to comment on on refugees and Transnistria. Speaking about passports, well, it's very well known in Ukraine that anyone in Ukraine who has any chance to obtain in any other passport will do that. It was more popular before the visa liberalization came through for Ukrainian citizens, but I think it will remain popular, and it's just as an insurance policy, and people would like to have a passport of another country which they hope to have a protection from in case of difficult situations and so on. But speaking about trading in passports and so on, unfortunately, Hungary was not the only EU member state which did so. We could speak about Cyprus and their passports in return of some in cash for Russian citizens, for instance. And speaking about money coming from Russia to Cyprus, you might speculate that they were not earned in, I don't know, in potato fields or in mines, but on some other kind of activities. And Latvia is also known for that. So basically, it's something, I would agree that this is something which erodes this idea of EU citizenship, but unfortunately, Hungary is not the only EU member states which does that, and it hasn't been tackled so far as that I've noticed. And yeah, I really believe that is something which it would be better for the EU to have dealt with. But speaking about all those erosions, I think which situation in Transnistria, my comment on Transnistria could be linked to that. The situation in Transnistria is very interesting in the fact that I think that all the parties involved have used to live in a situation which is now, and all the parties involved try to have some benefits from it. For instance, it's cheaper for Moldovan citizens to have their car registered in Transnistria because they have smaller payments for that, and because Moldova recognizes the number plates on cars registered in Transnistria. Many Moldovans import cars, then they register them in Transnistria, but they use them elsewhere. And if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine still recognizes number plates issued in Transnistria. So basically, people living around Transnistria use it as the black hole to minimize their taxes and payments that they do to the states. But what I would want to say that all those integration efforts towards Transnistria, which EU has supported in the past, basically allowed for that. So all those mechanisms which allowed companies registered in Transnistria to export to the EU based only on condition that they would register themselves in Chisinau and they would export via the border controlled by Moldovan authorities. I would say that it's a minimum requirement which didn't require a lot of Transnistrian authorities, so to say, or the companies registered there, but a lot for the big money coming to them. So EU has willingly allowed for the situation when Transnistria could basically be a parasite on those arrangements which Moldovan government negotiated with the EU, which they had to submit themselves to some conditionality. And you had a territory which was used for money laundering, for tax evasion, and profiting from the trade arrangements between Moldova and the EU with the, acceptance of the EU itself. Probably it was seen as a way of integrate Transnistria further with Moldova, but it didn't work themselves. It just gave additional cash inflow to Transnistria and gave them a chance to brag about their successful policies and how their relations with Russia, for instance, are more profitable than could have been otherwise. So, what I was trying to say that if you have malign forces which are interested in placing instability around EU borders or in the Eastern Europe, and at some point EU has willingly or unwillingly cooperated with those forces, and it's hard for me to say if it's possible. What better policies could have been in place, but this one I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a very successful policy and it was a good choice. And basically this is the idea of probably those peripheries, if we come into the title of this panel, have been used as a experimental ground. You just see what works there and what doesn't work, but if some policy fails, it's not a big deal, probably it's seen like that, because it's a small territory which doesn't have such a big impact on the EU as a whole, as a big strong mechanism, but it also provides, unfortunately, the territories which say that you can be voluntaristic, you can impose some policies, and then nobody would basically do anything about it because they would be just not paying attention. So this it influences this self-reliance or self-belief of those malign forces, if we just say it in general. And well, yeah.
I think that's very interesting what you described. And a few years ago, I was traveling and studying in this whole, because I think it's a good example and precisely what you have just said. In this whole region, Moldova, Transnistria, Odessa, Oblast, and Romania. And there you have one of the most beautiful and important biodiversity region of Europe, which is the Danube Delta, which is basically shared between Romania and Ukraine. And I made a point because I know Odessa quite well, and that's really a region I'm quite interested in. Also because I think that will be a good region to interconnect Ukraine with the European Union. So I made a point to go from Odessa back to Vienna overland, and this was incredibly difficult. And there were no infrastructure. You had to go through Moldavia. When you want to connect Romania, Moldavia, and Ukraine, of course you have Transnistria all the way. So, as you said, like we let this region being completely absurd in terms of pure infrastructure, which is something we would never allow in core Europe. To have such like so many borders and no bridge and so on and so on. And I think because also to come back to what you said about Ukraine and what I say first about considering these peripheries as interface and where we could have the same success that you described with Ireland and all these countries. Like there is in this particular region that you described, so the interconnection, we will need some voluntarism, and also in the good of way of building bridge, building roads, building train station, protecting the environment, and then that would be a good example for Ukrainians also that something can be done. And I mean the Odessa region would have a huge potential economically, touristically, and it's completely corrupted currently. Enfin, you know better, but so yeah.
As we are close to lunch time, so I think I give the floor to Jeremi because he spoke less than others here, and then we'll final this part of the panel.
No, to już jest temat, który by nas wprowadził w nieco inne rozważania, ale może warto go w dwóch zdaniach poruszyć. Mianowicie w tej chwili te, jak się wydaje, najistotniejsze decyzje, które stoją przed Europą, kwestia wspólnej polityki obronnej, kwestia wspólnej polityki w stosunku do uchodźców, kwestia dwóch prędkości. To są wszystkie kwestie, gdzie dojdzie do nowych podziałów, bo niektóre państwa są tylko zainteresowane sprawami uregulowania wspólnego kwestii uchodźców, tylko część państw uważa, że zagrożenie rosyjskie jest ważne, część uważa, że tak albo nie, a część w ogóle nie. No i podobnie jest ze sprawą prędkości, jeśli chodzi o politykę finansową i gospodarczą. Więc we wszystkich tych przypadkach przypuszczalnie dojdzie do nowych podziałów. Jest dla mnie kwestią interesującą, czy to będą podziały na pewien czas i wtedy ta część krajów, która się będzie chciała wyłączyć z tej wspólnej polityki, dołączy, czy w niektórych sprawach będziemy mieli wspólną politykę, a w niektórych pozostaniemy podzieleni, jak gdyby ten schemat centrum i peryferia może się, że tak powiem, na inny sposób ułożyć, niż jest do tej pory. Jedna uwaga końcowa, lunch przed nami. Mianowicie, sprawa peryferii to też nie tylko sprawa geografii, czy jakieś pozostawania na boku wielkich wydarzeń, to troszkę też sprawa może być psychicznego nastawienia. Ja gdzieś mam pewne zobowiązania albo nie chcę ich realizować, albo ich świadomie nie realizuję, bo jest to dla mnie wygodne. W związku z tym, że tak powiem, peryferię można odnaleźć nagle i w centrum, bo taka postawa, że mam pewne zobowiązania, ale się z nich nie wywiązuję, jest częsta i powszechna. Ja się powołam tutaj krótko, żeby troszkę odwrócić dyskusję i spojrzeć na to nagle od innej strony. Na ostatnią książkę Joszki Fischera o Niemczech, gdzie on stwierdza, że w Niemczech nie ma kultury strategicznej. Jeśli Europa chce pójść do przodu, no to musi się zdać na Francję. To jest bardzo silny akcent u niego. Gdyby pójść dalej w toku tej dyskusji naszej, można by powiedzieć, zdaniem Joszki Fischera, Niemcy zachowują się jak państwo peryferyjne. To znaczy nie zdają sobie sprawy do końca z odpowiedzialności. Więc można i taki aspekt tutaj pokazać.
Dziękuję bardzo. Po przerwie lunchowej będziemy rozmawiać o jednym z istotniejszych właśnie problemów, które dzielą Europę na różne strefy o różnym rozwoju, czyli euro i stosunku między przyjmowaniem wspólnej waluty a byciem Europejczykami. A teraz dziękuję Wam serdecznie za udział w panelu i za Wasz wkład i zapraszam na lunch.